That's when I heard that these murders had occurred. I did not know that I was sitting amongst the murderers. I had no idea about that until later.
A lot later?
When we're in the desert, at the very end of August, I overheard Sadie telling Bush about the murders and describing the death of Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, and the La Bianca residents. She said that Sharon Tate cried for her mother, that Evan ran over and gutted her, basically.
On the lawn, yeah.
And then went back to killing the man. That she told Sharon Tate that she had no mercy for her, called her a bitch, and she didn't care if she was pregnant. And she said, I stabbed her until she stopped screaming.
Could you have been, if you were a little older, indoctrinated to the point where you participated in murder also? Or was there something different about your upbringing, your value system, despite the twisting that it underwent?
The difference, I would think, is that they didn't seem to care about the suffering of the victims. And I did. And it was something I just couldn't fathom, that you could do that.
So your weakness, in quotations, was to be more human than they?
I guess so. Because I just couldn't fathom hurting people like that. I mean, they butchered them.
Yeah.
After I overheard the Tate murders being discussed, I knew I had to get out of there. You know, I really put all my efforts and every bit of my conscious abilities in.
Still a naive teenager is able to break Manson's evil spell. What's fascinating is how Manson's insights into human behavior allowed him to handpick the members who were truly broken down by his relentless manipulation. These individuals were capable of justifying the pain and suffering of others in the name of Manson's cause. But even as a spectator on the ranch, Barbara's moral compass just wouldn't permit such corruption.
Barbara Hoyt escaped Barker Ranch by walking 43 kilometers through the desert. A few weeks later, Manson and the other killers were arrested. Bugliosi saw Hoyt's testimony as a crucial part of his case, but Manson maintained his ruthless control over the family. Hoyt received death threats from the cult, and they demanded she flee to Hawaii.
I always cooperated with the police, but I was very frightened to testify because of all the death threats. I didn't go to Hawaii, as some people said, just to avoid testifying. I was trying to keep them from.
Manson family member Ruth Ann Morehouse took Hoyt out of town and away from the trial.
I was scared to take the subpoena. I was very frightened to testify. I was constantly being threatened. Your family's gonna die. What could be done there could be repeated at your house. I was always threatened. That's why I went with them to Hawaii, because I was afraid they'd hurt my family. So.
Which God knows they were certainly capable of doing.
Yeah.
While the two were traveling in Hawaii, Ruth Ann Morehouse offered Barbara Hoyt a hamburger.
I ate the hamburger, and she said to me as she was getting on the plane, just imagine if there were 10 tabs of acid in that hamburger. I started getting higher, and I couldn't figure out why. And I kept hearing in my head her saying, just imagine if there were 10 tabs of acid on it. Just imagine. It just kind of went over and over and over again in my head. And finally it dawned on me, there were 10 tabs of acid.
It was a potentially lethal dose of LSD.
When I got to the hospital, I told them to call Mr. Bugliosi because my name, my address, my zip code, anything I could think of. I wanted to be identified. I didn't want to be a Jane Doe.
Hoyt recovered, and when she was released from hospital, she immediately returned to Los Angeles.
It was within 2 weeks that I testified. I was not afraid to testify at that point. I was of a single purpose by then. I knew what I needed to do.
But even in the courtroom, Manson tried to control his former family member.
Charlie was trying to get me to answer questions one way, like, say no, like this, say no. And I said, well, yes, because the answer was yes.
Barbara Hoyt's testimony was damning for Manson. From prison, he ordered his followers to proclaim his innocence and demonstrate their devotion to the world.
At the very end, he did everything he could to save his life and get the girls to take on more than they actually did so that he wouldn't get a death penalty. He did not want to go to the gas chamber.
No acts of devotion were too extreme for the family.
And we crawled on our hands and knees all the way from the Sunset Strip to the courthouse. And I didn't think anybody took pictures of it. The reaction that we had to Charles Manson. I mean, it was to the point where, you just do it. There's just no way out.
How can you say that there's no question of his innocence?
Well, the newspapers now are dropping the word alleged. I can say anything I want to say.
You were expected to say certain things, and so you did.
What did you think you were expected to say?
That he was innocent. We said he was innocence because in our mind, he was pure. Whatever he did, he was still innocence.
Beautiful, Charlie. Are you all happy with your court?
Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, they took it upon themselves to try to save Charlie Manson's life and say that he had nothing to do with it.
Right.
This concocted story.
This is essentially what ingrained Manson in the nation's consciousness as such a frightening figure. The sight of so many young girls remaining passionately devoted to a psychopath, even when his depraved and murderous mindset seemed obvious to everyone else. It was clear that he had taken control of some of our children, and that caused fear among everyone who wondered, could this happen in my family?
All my feelings are good.
On January the 25th, 1970, of murder. But eerily, he was all smiles.
At the end of the trial, he said to me, well, Yossi, you haven't accomplished anything. He said, all you've done is send me back where I came from. And he was talking about prison. Prison was his life. He was totally institutionalized. When he got out of Terminal Island in 1967, he was 32 years of age. 17 out of those 32 years had been spent in jails, reformatories, and prisons. And I said to him, well, Charlie, that may be true, but you've never been to the green room before. The green room is where they execute people at San Quentin.
3 of the Manson girls were also convicted of murder. Tex Watson was tried and convicted separately. They were all sentenced to death. But in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, and the sentences were commuted to life in prison. Dr. Stone considers whether the convicted murderers are as evil as Manson himself.
Tex Watson oversees the savage massacre ordered by Manson and takes great pleasure in butchering his victims. I rank him at 15 on my scale of evil, a psychopathic, cold-blooded, spree murderer. Susan Atkins gleefully stabbed Sharon Tate. Patricia Krenwinkel displayed brutality and viciousness. They would both also rank at 15 as is harder to place. While she was convicted of murder, she was not at the Tate scene and did not necessarily inflict any fatal blows. While she certainly helped subdue the LaBiancas and facilitate the crimes, the stab wounds she inflicted on the victims appear to have been committed post-mortem. Therefore, I hold her less accountable and place her at a level 3 on the scale. Non-psychopathic, impulsive people who act as willing accomplices with killers.
But judging these murderers is one thing. Judging the man who corrupted them, the killer who's come to personify evil but didn't physically commit the crimes, presents a more difficult challenge. October 1971. Charles Manson, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten had been convicted of murder for the brutal Tate LaBianca killings. These were terrible crimes, masterminded by a brilliant psychopath. But for Dr. Michael Stone, ranking Charles Manson on his scale of evil is a complicated problem.
Manson has come to represent most people's picture of evil. but he himself to reach the highest level of my scale. Manson's evil acts come in the form of manipulation and control of the people who then do the murdering. The fear he instills to this day would presume a ranking as high as 22, but fear and evil are quite different. He never actually kills the victims in the Tate LaBianca murders. It is for this reason I place Charles Manson at level 15 on my scale of evil, a psychopathic spree murderer.
The guilty verdict didn't end Manson's evil legacy. 2 years after the nightmarish slaughter of 7 innocent victims, the Manson family was as strong as ever. It had expanded beyond its 24 core members as more young people were attracted to Manson and the media spectacle. Even with their leader on death row, true believers on the outside remained fiercely loyal to Manson. Their continued devotion to a crazed murderer only fueled Manson's mystique. The hardcore believers were desperate to free their leader. Several family members were arrested while attempting to rob a gun shop. It was rumored to be the first step in a plot to hijack a plane and trade the hostages for Manson's freedom. Shootout with police, but she denies knowing about a planned hijacking.
Were you or were some of the others involved in the idea of hijacking a plane and doing something in order to free Manson?
Well, I was in a shootout with the police. That was a big deal. That I did. I was sitting in a car waiting for them to come out. I got shot in the shoulder. And then I went to prison. It's a bad place to be put into.
Yes, indeed.
Most people don't make it out of it.
Right.
I'm just extremely blessed to have a life like this. Most people don't make it out.
There may never be a final tally on the number of people who have fallen prey to Manson and his deranged ideology.
In his ability to detect weaknesses and fears in people and exploit those weaknesses and fears, in my opinion, he was a genius. And that is a precise reason, I think, why people are frightened of Charles Manson more than the average mass murderer. With Manson, since he could get other people to...
Unsolved murders.
This is somebody that suffers extensive torture.
Devastating violence, with no one to blame. Decodes a killer's motive, method, and mind. The more heinous the crime, and the more rational the perpetrator, the higher the criminal is placed on the scale. Creator of this scale, Dr. Michael Stone, forensic psychiatrist, Columbia University.
My scale helps me navigate the rather turbid waters of violent crime.
But when the killer is unknown, all that can be placed on the scale is the crime itself. Dr. Stone will use his scale to create a profile of the possible killer by reviewing the crimes they have left behind. How will these profiles challenge Dr. Stone's scale as he asks key questions? What does the nature of the crime reveal about the killer? Was the victim tortured? Did the killer leave a message? Can Dr. Stone's scale help reveal the face of evil? June 1945. America breathes a sigh of relief at the end of World War II. But in Chicago, there's a woman killed. The body of Josephine Ross in her own bed. Her mattress is soaked with blood. Her throat is slashed, and her head is wrapped in a dress. But there is no blood on the body. The victim has been bathed after the murder, and her wounds carefully closed with adhesive tape. A witness saw a man descending a fire escape the day of the murder. The bizarre state of the cleansed and taped corpse is all the police have to go on. After 2 months, they have no suspects and make no arrests. The case goes cold. 6 months later, another victim is found. The body of Frances Brown is found draped over her bathtub. She is nude. Her nightgown is wrapped around her head. She has been shot twice, and a butcher's knife is lodged in her neck. Like Josephine Ross, she has also been bathed after the murder. But this time, the killer left more than a cleansed corpse. Scrawled in lipstick on the wall, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." The way the bodies were cleaned convinces police that one killer is responsible for possible suspects. And from the confession on the wall, police fear they now have a serial killer on the loose. Newspapers dub him the Lipstick Killer, and everyone is afraid he will strike again. January 7, 1946. The parents of 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan find her missing from her bedroom. FBI agents and local police scour the neighborhood for the missing girl. After a matter of hours, an officer discovers what looks to be a doll's head in a sewer basin. Instead, he has just found the first piece of Suzanne Degnan's dismembered body. Parts of the little girl are found scattered throughout the neighborhood's sewers. A partial torso is found wrapped in blue pajamas. An autopsy reveals that Suzanne's body was not carelessly cut apart. It is severed at the joints with a surgeon's skill. Chicago police have never witnessed such brutality. Police still have no leads, no potential suspects. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone creates a profile of the unknown killer.
It seems unusual to me that I can speculate the suspect is surely a man. Looking at the lipstick killings, there are some established patterns that emerge. Most striking of which is the killer's desire to cover up the crime. The washing of the bodies, placing tape over the wounds, hiding limbs of a little girl, almost as if he couldn't stand to look at what he'd done. We can assume he suffered an abusive background, with a progression of crimes leading up to something as tragic as dismembering a child. He's a psychopath with a possible schizoid personality. It's for these reasons that I placed the murderer, whoever he was, at level 18 on my scale. Serial murderers that are sexually perverse.
Following the Degnan murder, panic ensues. Parents keep their children inside and lock their doors and windows. Newspapers call the lipstick killer spree the crime of the century. After 6 months, the police finally make an arrest. A 17-year-old named Bill Hirons. A small-time thief with a police record, Hirons is caught breaking into a house in the same neighborhood where Suzanne Degnan was murdered. Bill Hirons is a loner. Accepted early to the University of Chicago, Hirons is a strong student and is studying electrical engineering, spending hours taking things apart and putting them back together. But there is another side to Hirons. At age 13, Hirons began to steal. By the time he was 17, he was breaking into apartments, taking people's jewelry, money, and even guns.
Serial killers are not born overnight. There's a gestation period. At first, their crimes appear insignificant, but over time, events escalate. Evil builds on itself.
It takes a month for Bill Hirons to confess to the crimes of the lipstick killer. For his cooperation, Hirons escapes the electric chair, but he is sent to prison for the rest of his life. However, from prison, Hirons claims he is an innocent man. Chicago believes they have caught the lipstick killer. But is this case solved? Dr. Stone travels to the Dixon prison to compare his profile of the possible murderer with the man who has been behind prison walls for the past 60 years. At 77, Hirons has spent more time in an Illinois state prison than anyone else. Is Bill Hirons the lipstick killer? Dr. Stone considers if this case actually...
Killing the 3 women 60 years later, question now is that something you can say that you did, or something you didn't do?
I'd say absolutely did not do it.
Dr. Stone continues his interview to see if Bill Hirons could match his profile of the killer.
I thought it'd be good to get a little picture as to what your original family was like.
There are arguments, especially where the money was there, but my dad pocketed it, used it for other things.
Did he drink some of it away?
I'm afraid so.
Bill Hirons grows up in a lower middle-class neighborhood in Chicago. His parents struggle with money and fight constantly about his father's drinking. He is a curious but reckless child. His mother once caught Hirons on top of their roof, ready to take flight with homemade paper wings. A boy longing to escape.
I understand they send you to some place for wayward kids.
Juvenile offenders.
Yeah.
It was a boys' boarding school. You learn from them what you should not be learning.
What they teach you? Well, to do those things, experience a kind of a rush, a thrill of getting away with it. Is that something that you experienced?
No, I think it was mostly fear. Didn't have that kind of emotion from it. A lot of the times I put back what I took directly into the place where it was taken from me.
When I was creating a profile of a possible killer, I was forced to rely on the details of the crime scene. The brutal stabbings, the cleansing and taping of the bodies, even the dismemberment of a child. Sitting before Bill Hirons, I tried to imagine him as a 17-year-old boy. And I wonder, was he even capable of this?
I just did some foolish things back in those days when I was a kid. Without much thought.
You ended up with this nickname, the lipstick killer. So, what we're interested in is how you got from being caught stealing the wallet or whatever it was, and being arrested for that, and being targeted, for these more serious crimes, the 2 murders and the kidnapping and murder of the little girl.
These are unsolved crimes. And they happen to be murder.
Yeah.
And that's what the publicity was. And they were looking for somebody to convict on that. And that pretty well summarizes what the situation was on me at that time. And everybody was pointing their finger at me, and they didn't have any reason to, except that I had been a murderer.
Right. Had you ever, in any of the burglaries, the break-ins, whatever, had you ever done something that hurt a person physically? In other words, that it was like an assault where you hit somebody or hurt somebody physically?
No. When they were trying to arrest me, I did fight back.
When you were arrested, one of the things that complicated things for you, you had a gun at that time? Yeah, loaded gun.
Yeah.
So that didn't sit well, I guess, with the police.
Well, I used it to get away.
Yeah.
I I stopped her from chasing me by using the gun. They gave me a little lead. But a detective came up. He knew I had a gun because the people that were chasing me told him that I had one. And as soon as he saw me, he started shooting with his gun. And he shot 3 times. I didn't shoot at all. But he missed. And so I took the gun that I had and I threw it at him. And he ducked. The gun hit soundly on the floor. It didn't go off. I jumped on top of him and we were wrestling on the floor. That's when somebody came up behind me and hit me over the head with the flower buds.
Having the gun helped make the police think that you were somebody capable of doing very violent crimes.
Probably.
You confess, and the rest is history. The last 60 years is history. So what's intriguing is, what were the things that, in your mind, led to your confessing? How did that?
Yeah, right.
Were there any things that the prosecutors did say you had done or whatever? Was there any truth that, looking back in your own mind, in any of their allegations?
No, I don't believe so. The prosecutors admitted later on that they had no evidence at all. Without the confessions, they could not have gotten convictions. It was impossible to. And now that, since then, I've found other things that came up.
Hirons remembers the Suzanne Degnan investigation like it was yesterday. It has been 6 months since the brutal murder of Suzanne Degnan. The public is desperate for a suspect. After a botched burglary, Hirons is cornered by police, only a few blocks away from the Degnan home. He spends a month in custody being interrogated by police. Police are convinced that Bill Hirons is the lipstick killer and that he is responsible for the brutal murder of 2 women and the dismemberment of a little girl. He faces the death penalty. Police bring Hirons to pose for the press, reenacting how he kidnapped Suzanne Degnan from her bedroom. In exchange for a life sentence, Hirons confesses to murdering all 3 victims. There is no trial. He is sentenced to life in prison.
And when the Degnan trial was outrageous on it, the newspapers kept it going.
Right.
Such that everybody was scared.
The Daily News publishes that Hirons admits to all 3 murders, even before he can give his own statement. Everyone believes Hirons is guilty.
The police were manufacturing evidence against me.
Who?
The police.
The police.
Investigators. I can establish that because of what appeared in the newspapers at that time.
Hirons claims the Chicago police put him through a severe interrogation. In 1946, there were no Miranda rights for the accused. Hirons says he was denied access to a lawyer. He says he suffered beatings, was denied food and water, given injections with sodium pentothal, truth serum, and for some unknown reason, a spinal tap. Hirons claims he was tortured. After his month in custody, under relentless publicity and scrutiny, Hirons reluctantly confesses to being the lipstick killer.
You confess to killing the 3 women. And that brings in the question, which must be intriguing people for all these 60 years. What really prompted you to confess?
Because it's gone to trial with Aldersted, and it would mean the death sentence. And if I'm dead, I can't prove that I didn't commit the crime. So I had to stay alive. I would be dead if I did not confess to it. And then I would not have a chance to get those crimes solved. I could solve them, I thought, on my own.
Does this case remain unsolved? Hirons is the longest-serving inmate in the state of Illinois. Legal counsel and nationwide campaigns have attempted to come to Hirons' aid as a wrongly accused man. Despite an exemplary record, Bill Hirons has always been denied parole.
Meeting with Hirons poses a serious question. It's unlikely that Hirons would ever have been capable of the things done by the lipstick killer. He just doesn't seem to fit my profile. Looking back all the years now, what are the things about which you have the most regret, or do you have regret about certain things in your life?
Oh, there are lots of regrets. A big loss. A big, big loss. My life, and I have to end up spending 60 years in prison.
Bill Hirons remains in prison as the lipstick murderer, but the crimes may be unsolved. But 2,000 miles away, are answers right around the corner? Los Angeles, January 15th, 1947. A woman's naked corpse is found in a vacant lot. The scene is shocking. The woman's face is gashed with a blade, ear to ear, creating a hideous grin.
They find a body that's perfectly bisected, cut in half. All the blood has been drained from the body. They see signs of torture. See a careful posing of the body, not just dumped there or thrown there, but a careful and deliberate posing.
Her upper torso is separated from her legs by 6 inches. Her arms are raised over her head and bent at the elbows at 90-degree angles. She is placed inches away from the sidewalk to ensure her corpse would be noticed. Police stand over her mutilated body in shock. They have never seen anything like this before. Investigators identify the body-year-old Elizabeth Short. An autopsy reveals none of her internal organs were damaged. Her body was cut in half with surgical precision. Police have no leads. But the murderer is a constant presence in the investigation, providing intriguing clues. The killer sends Elizabeth Short's missing purse to police, along with cryptic postcards that taunt the public. Over the course of the next few months, newspapers receive numerous messages from the killer, teasing the press with his identity. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Stone sees a pattern in these unsolved crimes.
This is an individual who is desperate for recognition. He wants credit for what he's done. Like the lipstick killer, the Black Dahlia murderer has a need to communicate with the public.
Investigators follow every lead, yet the case goes unsolved. The mysterious and dramatic dismemberment has made Elizabeth Short a murder victim with celebrity status. Novels and Hollywood films have been inspired by this unsolved case. Legions of fans have grown obsessed with the gruesome details of her murder and who could be the killer. Who would be compelled to tear this woman apart? In the 1940s, it seemed like everyone in Hollywood was a suspect, from Bugsy Siegel to legendary director Orson Welles. But the LAPD could never solve the crime. The murder becomes forever known as the Black Dahlia. Steve Hodel was only a boy living in Hollywood when Elizabeth Short's severed corpse was found. By the time Steve joined the LAPD in 1963, the Black Dahlia was already the most notorious unsolved murder in Los Angeles history. Now, 50 years later, the nature of Elizabeth Short's murder reveals much to the retired detective about the kind of person capable of such a killing.
Clearly, this is somebody that suffered extensive torture, maybe 2 or 3 hours. We noticed that this was a perfect bisection. There's only one way you can divide a body without going through the bone, and that's going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae. This was not a butcher or a meat cutter. This had to have been somebody highly skilled in medicine.
With over 40 years of investigating experience, Detective Steve Hodel has never faced a more daunting case. But he could never imagine the personal connection he would make to the Black Dahlia murder, one that involves his own bloodline. Following the death of his father in 1991, Steve stumbles across a mysterious black and white photo of a nude woman. It is a picture that...
Why does this face seem familiar to me? To this day, I don't know why, but the Black Dahlia comes to mind.
Steve believes the photo is of a nude Elizabeth Short. But why would Steve's father, Dr. George Hodel, have this intimate photograph of the Black Dahlia?
I started researching the investigation and looking into it because I really knew nothing even though I'd been with LAPD and this was their most famous unsolved case. And I discovered that somebody with surgical skill had committed the crime. And I thought, interesting, Dad had surgical skill, but it never occurred to me that he might be the suspect.
But as Steve's investigation continues, details of the crime all point him to only one man who could be the killer.
My God, this can't be. There is the possibility.
Steve's own father, Dr. George Hodel. Steve's conviction runs so deep, he takes it upon himself to reopen the case of the Black Dahlia. As Steve's investigation develops, he realizes that there are striking circumstances that connect his father to this murder. Steve calls these thought prints.
On a fingerprint, you have whorls, arches, ridges. Think of thoughts as sort of the mental ridges, arches, whorls of the mind. And I've put together a bunch of points that link George Hodel.
George Hodel is a gifted young man full of promise and privilege. By the age of 9, he is a piano prodigy. George is recognized as a genius, scoring an IQ 1 point higher than Albert Einstein. But high genius comes with a price. Early acceptance to college at the age of 14 keeps George socially awkward and isolated. George retreats into himself to escape. He begins experimenting with drugs. He becomes engrossed with art, sex, and violence. George thinks of himself as a writer and photographer, but is never recognized for his talent. He becomes consumed with the darker, more dangerous sides of Los Angeles, and he is driven. Lying about his age, 19-year-old George becomes a newspaper crime reporter, writing gruesome accounts of murder scenes along the back streets of Los Angeles. The violence inspires him.
Oftentimes, genius comes with emotional instability. That, paired with George's precocious obsession with violence, can be a dangerous combination.
As a child, Steve was not close to his father, but remembers him as larger than life.
He was strict, but his charisma and his charm, it was more of the awe that we worshipped him. He was almost godlike to us.
George Hodel becomes a doctor. By day, he runs a VD clinic that holds the secrets of Hollywood studio moguls and celebrities alike.
Dad was very charismatic. He'd walk into a room and you felt you were like in the presence of a king or a pope. He had that kind of power.
By night, he throws decadent parties where the Hollywood elite indulge in drugs and beautiful women.
All of these amazing people coming and partying and drinking and having a wonderful time. Henry Miller, Man Ray, John Huston. You were literally in the middle of Hollywood, yet you were totally secluded once you entered this concrete fortress.
It is here that George meets Elizabeth Short. Steve believes that his father and Elizabeth Short maintained a love affair. A love affair that may have ended on a vacant lot with Elizabeth Short's corpse, perfectly bisected at the waist. The gruesome unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short has even inspired Hollywood films and pulp novels. Veteran LAPD detective Steve Hodel is convinced that he has found the man responsible for the Black Dahlia murder. His own father, Dr. George Hodel. Steve sees... In 1947, Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, is found naked with her mouth gashed ear to ear. Her corpse is posed 6 inches from the sidewalk on a vicious display. And her body is perfectly cut in half at the waist. Shockingly, none of her internal organs were damaged in the dismemberment.
The key is that a hemicorpectomy was performed on Elizabeth Short. It's only by going through second and third lumbar vertebrae can you perform this operation.
Steve reviews his father's records from medical school and discovers George had performed over 700 hours of surgery.
So clearly he was highly skilled in surgery and had the ability to bisect the body.
Steve sees his father's touch on the anonymous postcards that taunted Los Angeles newspapers.
What do we have here? We have headlines. He's sending in headlines. This is not some thug off the street. This is somebody trained in journalism.
George's experience as a young newspaper crime reporter provides a distinct connection for Steve.
It was a journalist. It was a journalist killer.
But it is George's infatuation with surrealist art that has Steve convinced that his father is the killer.
The key to understanding the Black Dahlia murder is surrealism. He always saw himself in the dream and the waking state. Where others intellectually believe this surrealist, he actually truly believed in his heart of hearts. If you go there, that's a very dangerous position to be in because it basically opens you up to just about anything. There are no rules. There is no morality. There is no God.
The surrealist artist Man Ray and George become friends, sharing a love for deviant sex and the violent domination of women. Man Ray is an enormous influence on George as an artist, acting as a surrealist mentor. Ultimately, it is this relationship that leads Steve to consider Elizabeth Short's posed corpse.
I reviewed the crime scene photos initially, and they bothered me. The deliberate posing. What was I seeing here? What was the killer trying to say? I started reviewing Man Ray's photographs. A lot of them depicted decapitations, segmented bodies. One of his most famous photographs is called the Minotaur. And this is a woman's body bisected at the waist, and the hands are posed in this position to represent the horns. This is a bull. The Minotaur, of course, was the half-man, half-bull of Crete, who devoured young maidens and was kept alive in a labyrinth.
Did the surrealist work of Man Ray influence George Hodel in his crime? The deliberate posing of the figure, the grotesque gash carved across her mouth. Is the Black Dahlia George Hodel's work of art?
He actually completed a masterpiece of surrealism. Elizabeth Short's body was his canvas. His scalpel was his paintbrush. He created something that he knew would live forever.
After a 7-year investigation, Steve presents his evidence against his own father to the authorities.
I go in secret and I take all of my evidence to an active head deputy district attorney, Stephen Kay. He says, based on what you've brought to me and based on the photographs and based on the evidence, and were your father still alive, I would seek the death penalty.
But mysteries surrounding the Black Dahlia case will keep the murder of Elizabeth Short unsolved.
All of these reports have been sanitized from the LAPD, and they've all disappeared. Not only have all of the transcripts and all of the information on George Hodel disappeared, but so has all of the physical evidence. Potential linkage to DNA has all vanished. LAPD has no explanation for it. All they say is, well, sometimes stuff happens.
Steve believes that evidence in the Black Dahlia file was destroyed to protect his father. Dr. Joel's secrets of the Hollywood elite. Secrets that may have protected him from the law. Retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel believes beyond a doubt that his own father is the Black Dahlia killer. When he looks at secret DA files about the case, he discovers that the LAPD had come to the same conclusion 50 years earlier. George Hodel was the chief suspect in the case. But DA files reveal darker secrets that Steve could never have imagined. As Steve reviews the case files, he learns that Elizabeth Short may not have been his father's only victim. The file reveals that George Hodel traveled to Chicago in 1946, the same year 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan's body is dismembered. Suzanne Degnan is one of the victims Bill Hirons was convicted of killing in the lipstick murders. The Black Dahlia and the Suzanne Degnan murder have striking details in common. Both victims were perfectly bisected by someone with a surgeon's skill. Each body was severed in half at the waist, with a precise cut through the second and third vertebrae.
The key is that a hemicorpectomy was performed on Degnan. That is only by going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae can you perform this operation. It's a specific location. This was done on Degnan, this was done on Elizabeth Short.
For Steve, the crime scene where Elizabeth Short's bisected corpse was found and the Chicago murder of Suzanne Degnan share an eerie coincidence that is too shocking to ignore. The Black Dahlia corpse was discovered on South Norton Street in Hollywood. Adjacent to South Norton is a street called Degnan Boulevard. Degnan, the last name of the little girl found dismembered in a Chicago sewer. It is Steve's belief that his father was trying to send a message to the world.
He bore to the left, still thinking he was on Degnan, drove up to 3815 South Norton, placed the body there, believing he was on Degnan, and went home.
In 1947, it appears George Hodel simply made a wrong turn. George Hodel's final statement would go unnoticed.
I believe that this was his ultimate taunt. He was saying to the cops, okay, if you're really clever and you can figure this out, you'll be able to make a connection between the Degnan murder and the Dahlia.
In fact, Steve believes that Elizabeth Short's knowledge of the Degnan murder may have led to her own fate.
And Elizabeth Short somehow discovered what we believe is George's involvement. I believe she found out that George committed that murder, and that's what signed her death warrant.
Could George Hodel be responsible for two of history's most evil murders? The mutilation of Elizabeth Short and the dismemberment of Suzanne Degnan? Is it possible that he could have also murdered the other victims in the lipstick killings? Could Bill Hirons be innocent of murdering two women and a little girl? Dr. Stone reviews the profile of Dr. George Hodel and the extraordinary possibility that he is both the Black Dahlia murderer and the lipstick killer.
It's clear, judging from the profiles of each unsolved case, that the same killer would be capable of committing the murders both of Elizabeth Short and Suzanne Degnan. George Hodel was a deeply disturbed man who, although brilliant, had a viciously distorted sense of reality. There's every reason to believe George Hodel enjoyed the horrible murder of Elizabeth Short and that he took pleasure in what he had done for the rest of his long life. We may never know for certain the killer responsible for the first two lipstick murders, but George Hodel's profile would make him more than correct. I would place George Hodel at the very top of my scale. Level 22. Psychopathic torture murderers with torture their primary motive. But questions remain about Bill Hirons, the man actually convicted as the lipstick killer. From my meeting with him, I feel his profile simply does not match that of the murderer.
Although Steve Hodel may have solved the case of the Black Dahlia and the lipstick killer, he may be too late to save Bill Hirons, the man convicted as the lipstick killer.
The sad thing is that we have a man 60 years incarcerated, wrongfully prosecuted.
Bill Hirons remains Illinois' longest-serving inmate and has always claimed his innocence. Despite recent legal campaigns and Steve Hodel's shocking revelations that his own father may be responsible for the murders, Bill Hirons has still been denied parole.
The only reason he confessed was to save himself. They said, you'll be executed, we're going to cook you, confess or die. And he made the right choice. A 17-year-old boy who had been beaten and under extreme duress, he would be dead. He would have been dead within a year had he pled not guilty.
Beyond doubt, his father, Dr. George Hodel, is a serial killer.
And based on my now 7-year investigation, we know that George Hodel committed the Black Dahlia murder of Elizabeth Short. I further am absolutely convinced that William Hirons did not commit the murder of Suzanne Degnan, and he's been serving 60 years for a crime that George Hodel committed.
The unthinkable. The unsolvable. What do some of history's most legendary unsolved murders tell us about the mind of a killer? Killers that may still be among us. Bill Hirons was convicted as the lipstick killer, responsible for the savage murder of 2 women and a 6-year-old girl. Today, many believe Hirons was wrongly accused, and there is no hope for his parole. The potential of a 17-year-old boy has dissolved into the longest-serving inmate in the Chicago prison system. The true lipstick killer may have continued to murder, leaving even more unsolved cases in his wake. Cold case detectives are constantly fighting against time. Dr. Stone's profiles provide another tool for detectives in their hunt for the killers. Investigators linking 2 of history's most brutal and vexing unsolved murders, the Black Dahlia and the lipstick killer. But these are just 2 crimes in an ocean of unsolved cases. Since 1960, more than 200,000 murders in the United States alone have gone unsolved. Each year, another 6,000 cases grow cold and are added to the total. With lack of evidence, few leads, and no witnesses, investigators often struggle to find a killer. In virtually every city in America, murders continue to go unsolved. February 25th, 1994, Fort Worth, Texas. Homicide detective Manny Reyes receives a call. A body has been discovered at a warehouse lot. The victim is a white male. He has been severely beaten and shot twice. Bloody footprints surround the body. A wallet still in the victim's back pocket reveals his identity. James McVeigh Jr., 39 years old. James's pickup truck is unlocked and filled with valuable tools. The keys to his truck are in his back pocket. There appears to be no signs of robbery. And there is something else unusual, entirely spray painted blue.
They went beyond just killing. They did a lot of things to him that we had not seen.
Evidence gathered at the scene provides no answers. An investigation into McVeigh's background yields no motive for Detective Reyes.
There was nothing about him, his lifestyle, or his work that contributed to him being killed.
Detective Reyes finds one witness who says he saw McVeigh's truck surrounded by 2 other cars. More than one killer may have been involved.
There's no way he would have gone back there on his own free will. There had to be somebody in the truck with him, forcing him to follow the lead car. There had to have been a minimum of 3. One driver in the front, one in McVeigh's truck, and one driver in the other side.
For over 6 months, Reyes tries to crack the case, but can't establish any motive or develop a potential suspect. Dr. Stone considers the McVeigh murder scene as he applies his scale to best compose a possible profile of the killer.
We can only speculate what transpired that night, but the investigation details greatly affect where the perpetrators belong on my scale. If McVeigh's murder was carried out by multiple people, it shows a heinous level 3, and that suggests the only reason to murder was for the thrill of killing this man. Was McVeigh's face spray-painted before his murder? If so, that would be a bizarre form of torture. I would place the killers at level 16 on my scale, which I reserve for psychopathic schemers who commit extraordinary and repeated vicious acts.
Yeah, this is Reyes. I need to get some property out of the property room.
It has now been more than 10 years since the murder of James McVeigh. There are still no leads. But Reyes once again examines the evidence from the crime scene, hoping for something that may have gone undetected. A clue that may lead to a suspect or an arrest.
This is a .15 projectile. This is what was used to shoot and kill James McVeigh. Even on fingerprints, what we were not able to pick up years ago was the new technology. Nowadays we can. Everything's changing so rapidly that that's one reason we keep on. We don't know what we're going to be able to do with this a couple of years from now.
The case of James McVeigh is not the only unsolved case that Detective Reyes is pursuing. In the 10 years since the crime, Reyes has opened Fort Worth's cold case unit, dedicated to closing the cases that remain unsolved. The McVeigh case is only one of more than 700 unsolved murders left for Detective Reyes to face alone.
There's no case that I have that I can say will never be solved. There's no such thing. You just can't have that kind of attitude. At any given time, something can happen on any case.
Unsolved murders, the quest for answers, and the solutions to the unknown. Dr. Stone's look into the mind of evil is just a piece of the puzzle. Creating a psychological profile using his scale may help investigators zero in on a suspect and solve mysteries of violent crime.
Chillin.